Hello, this is Professor Homa, and I'm back for part 2 of the vignette colorize video tutorial. And so far we haven't done the vignette or the colorizing, but we have done some image adjustments, particularly shadows and highlights, and we repositioned things, and we've scaled things in this 5x7 window. What we're going to do next is put our soft-edged vignette or frame on here, and we're going to do that by first. Well, first thing we could do is we're going to go put some guides on here because we need to position this frame exactly so it's not kind of, different sizes from the edges. So we want to make it nice and even so it's an even distance from the edge. So I'm going to go up to my rulers, and if you don't have your rulers, make sure you go to View, make sure Rulers is checked if it's not. So you could go to View Rulers if it's not out. But you could use your arrow tool and go in the middle of the ruler and click and hold down. And you're going to drag out a guide. And I'm going to drag out a guide about a ½ inch, or exactly a ½ inch, from the top, and also a ½ inch from the bottom, which I'd be going to around 4½ inches. And there's no rulers on the bottom or the right, so you got to go from the top and from the left side ruler. And again, I'll bring one over here, ½ inch, and then at about 6½ inches. So I should have guides creating kind of a ½ inch margin all around. And what I'm going to do inside this margin, now that I have the guides, is I'm going to go up to here to my toolbox, and I'm going to use the rectangular marquee tool. There's my rectangular marquee, and what that tool does is it just makes selections. And you can do whatever you want in the selections. But first you have to make a selection. So I'm going to draw a selection. I'm just going to draw a rectangle in that area indicated by the guides. And you can see it looks like a dotted line or marching ants, they used to say in some of the old Photoshop books, but I have this kind of marquee that's here right now, and it's about a ½ inch in, and what it's selecting everything inside. So if I did any kind of image adjustment or anything, it would actually only do it to the inside of here. It would leave everything out here alone. Well, what I actually want to do is I want to fill this outside with white. So I have to basically inverse or select the opposite of this selection, and I could do that by going up here to the Select menu, and I'm going to go Select Inverse, and that should select the opposite of what I have selected. So select Inverse, and you'll see now that I have a selection that's kind of a double marquee, but it's selecting that kind of ½ inch margin. So that's selected right now, and I could do whatever I want with it. I could fill it with white, which is what I plan to do, except if I filled it with white, if you look over here, I'm on my bridge layer, and if I fill it with white, that will go on my bridge layer permanently. And if I'm not happy with my frame or I don't want the frame, I've covered up pixels permanently. So I don't want to do that. Nice thing that with Photoshop you can do is you can make a new layer. So I'm going to go down to my layer palette at the very bottom here, and here's the new layer icon, and it's the one next to the trash can. And I'm going to click New Layer, and it makes a layer called Layer 1. And right off the bat, I'm going to double click and name it, and I'll call it Vignette. And make sure you spell it right, VIGNETTE, Vignette. And there's my vignette layer. There's nothing on it right now. Matter of fact, when you make that layer, it's basically a transparent layer. There's nothing there, and those gray and white, that gray and white checkerboard pattern means transparency, because there's no other way to show transparency, so they use that pattern. And you can change the colors and the size of the grid, but that means transparent. There's no pixels on that layer. But we're going to put pixels on that layer, and we're going to do that by filling our selection with white pixels. Now to do that, I'm going to go up to the Edit menu, and I'm going to choose Edit, Fill. And it's not going to fill anything yet. It's going to bring up this window, and it says white right now, which is what I want. But just to show you, it'll typically say foreground color first. But we have this little drop down, and it'll say foreground color. Foreground color, by the way, is the color that's showing up right here. This is foreground color in Photoshop. That's background color. So those are the two colors in Photoshop that show up in the toolbox. So foreground color, background color, you could choose a custom color, pattern from history, black, or white, and I'm going to choose white. So I'm going to choose white. Just make sure the mode is normal and the opacity is 100%, or else it won't be solid white. And I'm going to hit OK, and it just filled it with white. And I'm going to deselect this selection right now because it's important when I do the filter to soften the edges, it's important that this selection is not active, that it's no longer showing up like this. So to get rid of this, I could do a couple things. I could go Select Deselect or Command D. That will make that selection go away, Or, and promise me it'll do that, or I promise you it'll do that, or if you take your marquee tool and you just click outside of it and just click once, it'll go away. So either way, you could do select, deselect, Command D, or you could just click off of it. So either way, our selection's gone, and there's my, I could turn, if I turn this layer on and off, you can see it's on its own layer. And if I turned off other layers, the only thing there is just white pixels on the vignette layer. So it acts like a little frame over top of any other layer that you had there. So you could put all kinds of pictures underneath this layer. But the vignette part of it isn't just a white frame. The vignette part of it is softening the edges. So to do that, I'm going to run a blur on this vignette layer. Now before I do that, I'm going to do one thing. I'm going to go to View, I'm going to go to Show, and I'm going to turn off my guides. This doesn't delete them, it just turns them off so that I'm not looking at them right now, because the guides sometimes can kind of distract how you view the blur when you're previewing it. So the blur is actually a filter that we're going to run, and it just kind of smudges all the pixels. So we're going to go to Filter, and I'm going to go down to, and if you see Gaussian blur up here, that's the last setting that I used. Whenever you see something at the top, it's the last setting. And if you don't know what the last setting was, you're better off going to Blur and then going to Gaussian blur. That'll let you start from scratch with that setting. If you know that you've been repeating it, or repeating a sharpening filter or anything like that, you could use the one at the top. But for now, we'll make sure that we start it and use one that we choose on our own. So I'm going to choose Blur, Gaussian blur from the filter menu. And this setting, just so you know, it has a radius here of pixels. So if you have it all the way up, it's going to make everything look real hazy. If I move this away here, you can see our image is real hazy. And if I move it down lower, it's going to just look a little soft edge. But what we really want to do is just give it a nice soft edge, maybe somewhere in the 25 to 30 pixel range. And I could kind of just preview it here. I can see that's a nice soft edge, considering we're at 300 pixels per inch. If we were at lower resolution, we wouldn't need as much of a radius. We could be down lower, but that's a pretty good size there. And like I said, if you did any more, it might get a little too hazy. So I'm going to leave it right around 30. 29 is fine. And remember, once you do this and hit OK, this isn't something where you could double click on it and keep editing and changing it. So you got to be pretty happy with your blur right here. So I'm going to hit OK. And again, you could turn this off if you don't like it, put it on if you like it, but that's the vignette. And I could put as many photos underneath here as I want and just use the same vignette if I wanted to. And last thing I'm going to do before I stop this is I'm going to go File, Save As, because I should save this document so that I save this with layers. I'm just going to save this as Covered Bridge. And it's a PSD file. The format is Photoshop, and that means it saves with layers. And that's what we want in Photoshop, because if we want to get rid of the vignette, if we're going to colorize, all the things we're going to do with these layers. So we want to make sure we keep our PSD file before we make any JPEGs. So I'm going to stop here, and then we'll do the colorizing as part 3.